Throughout the decades, numerous players have faced consequences for prohibited substance use, whether through suspensions for performance-enhancing drugs, public admissions of drug use, penalties for evading mandatory testing, legal findings of illegal performance enhancement, or being banned from competition altogether. But more than any other case, Jannik Sinner's suspension from tennis broke the internet, divided players, stakeholders, and fans alike. I mean, we're talking about the #1 ranked tennis player in the world with allegations of doping, and it couldn't be more shocking. I made a separate video covering the strange opinions many of the players had about the situation, and the majority of you guys came to the conclusion that there was a gross lack of knowledge among most of the players. Well, Jannik Sinner has now served about 2/3 of his 3-month suspension, but somehow still leads the ATP race with only 1 tournament played this season. Now compare that to Zverev's 7 or Alcaraz's 5, and it's pretty crazy. Plus, Sinner's lead at the top of the ranking remains untouchable at the moment, and it's possible that we see him retain his #1 spot when he returns in May. No doubt, Sinner's absence has been a huge miss for tennis, but after seeing the PTPA's recent quotes about Sinner being the victim of a failed system, I figured I needed more clarity on the doping scandal that took over tennis. So to dig a level deeper, I reached out to 2 pretty influential people in our sport who also happen to be very knowledgeable about the anti-doping processes in tennis. Nothing prepared me for what I was about to learn.
I was the first professional athlete to be drug tested back in 1980. There's a lot of chefs in the kitchen, and I've always had an issue with this because when I played, it was very much the same.
This is Johan Kriek, a former top 10 player who won the 1981 and 1982 Australian Open singles titles and also reached the semis at Roland Garros and the US Open. He was also one of the very first tennis players to go through the hassle of being drug tested. And here's what he had to say about the experience.
We had a change of rules and stuff at the ATP that there's going to be random drug testing for, was that time mostly recreational stuff like cocaine and all that stuff, which I had no problem taking a test. So never heard from him again. So I was actually the first professional athlete, I believe, to have been tested in 1980. And, I was just a really strong guy. I was from South Africa, farm boy, so I grew up pretty healthy and, I was a pretty good specimen for an athlete. But maybe they thought my legs were too big for my size. So they just had to check me. But that was kind of a funny story, but that's kind of how it happened.
According to Kriek, it's getting to the point where the system is just so flawed and so ridiculous that it just doesn't work anymore. He even goes as far as saying that it goes to affect some players more than others.
But it just seems like it's getting to be, to a point where, what are these players going to do? Are they going to eat bananas that are organic and that's it? And they live in a cocoon? I mean, you're not supposed to breathe this air or that air because maybe there's something in it. I just hope that there's some normalcy that can return to these testing methodologies, and we could actually see what is enhancing and what isn't enhancing.
But something struck me about what Kriek said. We've got to ask ourselves the all-important question: what is performance enhancing and what isn't? If a medication or supplement doesn't improve your strength, energy level, and endurance, but helps you to recover faster in between matches, should that count as performance enhancement? Now guys, one of the substances that has come under a lot of scrutiny these days is Adderall. More players are being diagnosed with ADHD and are using Adderall to help them become more competitive. And for those of you wondering just what exactly this drug does, a pilot study of healthy college students in the United States conducted in 2018 showed that Adderall significantly increased autonomic activity compared to a placebo treatment. It improved attention skills, increased motivation, and improved overall reaction time. However, the drug experience was very subjective, which means that not everyone felt the exact same way after taking it. I should also add that players who require therapeutic use exemptions typically have to go through several hurdles to get their TUEs approved, so it's not exactly like it's a straightforward process either.
But here's where things get interesting. Kriek has an interesting take on the current state of things in tennis right now.
He believes that as both tours become more and more physically demanding, players are gonna find their backs against the wall.
I would say that there's so much money in the sport now at the top 100 level that maybe players are looking at a shortcut. But I just think that we need to be very careful that we are not killing the tour with putting so many tournaments together in terms of it's great to make all this money, but I think that the players are going to pay the price.
Let's be clear here. Although no one ever wants to see their favorite athlete being banned for doping, let alone be guilty for even trying to, Kriek believes that we could be heading that direction in the near future if things don't change. According to the two-time major champ, the broken system of the anti-doping protocols in the sport is a result of this.
We have two tours running this professional side. You got the ITF running the four majors, and then you got the ATP running the rest of the tour. So we don't have one commissioner that can really say this is what we're going to do. Like the NFL has Goodell, and whether you like him or not, but he's like the final straw. He's the final say. We don't have that, In tennis, professional tennis, the agents are incredibly powerful with their top players. They have a lot to say. And so there's just a lot of chefs in the kitchen, and I've always had an issue with this because when I played, it was very much the same.
For those of us who need to refresh our memories on the timeline of events for Jannik Sinner's doping case, here's a quick summary. On April 4th, Sinner is notified by the ITIA of an adverse analytical finding and is suspended provisionally on April 4th, 2024. His team identifies the source of contamination and applies for the ban to be lifted. The ban is then lifted the following day.
The first question that comes to mind is how Sinner's team was able to immediately identify the source of the contamination and then file for an appeal to have the ban lifted that exact same day.
2 weeks later, on April 17th, Sinner is informed of a second AAF and responds with yet another successful application to lift the provisional suspension. Just 3 days later, on April 20th, the ban is lifted again. 1 month later, on May 30th, the ITIA formally charges Sinner in court. Sinner's legal team then submits documents with detailed explanations on how the positive tests came to be on June 19th. The case is then heard by an independent tribunal on August 15th, and on August 18th, Jannik is cleared just a few days later. Then, for the first time, the news is made public on August 20th. WADA then files an appeal on September 26 to the CIS seeking a 1 to 2 year ban. They argue that the finding that Sinner bore no fault or negligence is incorrect. Fast forward to November, and ATP chairman Andrea Gaudenzi admits that there could have been better communication to explain rules involved, but slams any accusations of favoritism. Sinner doesn't get a court date until January 10th, and they have it scheduled for April 16th to 17th. Both parties then announce a settlement on February 15th, and Sinner gets a suspension backdated to February 9th to run up until May 4th, 2025, causing him to miss 4 Masters 1000s, a couple of 500s, but most importantly, no Grand Slams. Looking back in hindsight, there's a lot to unpack here. Was the punishment fair, undeserved, or just a slap on the wrist? Well, from my experience so far, the answer to that question depends on who you ask.
In search of some more answers, I reached out to Dominic King, an expert who's also worked with the British Lawn Tennis Association as an advisor on anti-doping matters.
Dom believes the doping scandal wasn't exactly a black and white situation, and so should be discussed with a lot of nuance.
It's a very nuanced, as you say, a very nuanced kind of situation, and I think to try and sort of reduce it to something very binary is kind of inadvisable at best, I think.
With a lot of experience in the anti-doping world, Dom also shared his thoughts on Jannik Sinner's lawyers and how they went about the court hearing in the first place.
But to be honest, I was very surprised. When it first came out, I was actually very surprised that there was an April date for the hearing. I really thought that if I'd been his lawyers, I would have pushed hard for a date very soon after the Aussie Open, because then you had the best chance of getting a good hearing and a good settlement. I always thought that he was going to get a ban, but I think my main takeaway from it was the lawyers have earned every single penny of their fee in terms of what they've done and sort of the settlement that has been negotiated.
Dom also shared his thoughts on Sinner's lawyers and how they went about the court hearing in the first place. However, we gotta go back to the elephant in the room and ask ourselves a super important question. If a player's test sample comes back positive, and that same player is 100% responsible for what goes into their bodies, what should the punishment be for a positive test?
Based on his experience from working with tennis players, here's what every athlete should know.
Is 100% responsible for what goes in their system. That's tough because you're talking about young people, young people who were expecting to be in control and be in charge of everything, and they're dealing with older team members who they will obviously respect and respect their knowledge, respect their experience. And it's hard, I think, as a young player to then challenge someone maybe who's a little bit older in your team. But you have to know that anything that goes, and I always say, like, even if your mum, who you love and trust more than anything in the world, gives you a cough medicine or something if you're not feeling well. As soon as you put it in your body, it's your responsibility.
Essentially, the reason WADA couldn't let Sinner off the hook was because the ITIA ruling that Sinner bore no fault or negligence brought about a conflict of interest with WADA's code of conduct.
The thing is, WADA were kind of in a no-win situation. They had to contest it because the 100% me responsibility for the athlete is at the very core and ethos of WADA. So without that, they kind of don't have, there's nothing really. So therefore, if he's deemed to have zero responsibility and tennis authorities sign up to the WADA principle, the WADA code, WADA had to contest that. It was, they had to, in my opinion, and that's why I kind of thought, as much as I necessarily don't like the situation, I just thought it was inevitable that he was going to get a ban.
Now, going through the subject over the last couple of months, one of the major arguments against the Sinner camp was that he was given preferential treatment. But the truth of the matter is that Sinner's team didn't go against any of the laid down rules.
Everything they did was within the boundaries and within the rules, so I don't think there's any fault there. But yeah, I mean, if you could have cherry-picked dates for the ban, you'd have picked the dates that they've done. Wins the Aussie Open, gets effectively a nice break, comes back in time for Rome, comes back in time for Roland Garros. You couldn't really have picked dates better. So WADA can come at it and say we got our ban, because we needed to show that the athlete is responsible, even if there was no intent. The athlete is responsible, so we got our ban. Yannick Sinner takes the ban and says, "Yeah, I accept that. I accept that I was responsible, etc., etc." But it's a great ban.
Bearing in mind that not everyone was satisfied with the process and outcome, it begs the question of what exactly needs to be changed.
This doesn't look good. We need to really properly standardize the process. So maybe it's a situation where, as in Yannick Sinner's case, it's not made public, no one knows. And that's the case for everyone. Or it's the case where if there's a positive test, it's made public immediately and everyone knows. And so it actually might have a positive upside, that it might actually bring a bit of consistency and conformity to the process, and whatever is decided upon, it has to be communicated to the players and the teams primarily.
But let me say this, the design and implementation of better anti-doping protocols is going to require a lot more resources, and it's definitely a conversation that we have to be having.
It depends about resources. I mean, I don't know how often players are tested. Maybe they could be tested more often, maybe they could be tested more often at lower levels as well. But it's all about resources. There's a lot of resources that need to go into that, especially when players are spread far and wide all over the globe. It's also I think the unit is basically responsible. There's a bit of like anti-doping is one half of it, and then like almost like anti-corruption is the other half of it. So you're thinking, where's your best allocation of resources?
Sinner can return to training as early as April 13th and will be able to participate in the Masters 1000 in Rome, which begins on May 7th. This is going to give him some extra time to prepare for the French Open, which kicks off also later in May. More so, with the support from the Italian crowd in Rome, it's definitely the ideal setting for a return. As far as expectations go, though, it's difficult to estimate the impact of the ban on Sinner's performance. Plus, the fact that he's returning to a surface that isn't his favorite makes you wonder what his level is going to look like in the first few tournaments. On the one hand, I'm not expecting Yannick to come back immediately and start dominating like before, but if he does, and given the state of the rest of the top 10, I wouldn't be surprised in the slightest. Sinner's time away from the ATP Tour has made one thing clear, and that's the fact that no player is anywhere close to being as dominant as the Italian. One week, it's Felix Auger-Aliassime riding the hot hand, and the following week, it's Alcaraz running everyone out of the building in Rotterdam. Then it's Rublev winning in Doha, only to be found MIA after that. And after that, it's Tsitsipas's backhand catching fire in Dubai, only for Draper to show up in the desert. And now, we have Djokovic and Jakub Mensik making huge statements in Miami. Not one player has been able to dominate the tour in Sinner's absence, and it only shows how high his level was compared to everyone else. Looking past the players and fan reactions to the doping scandal that took over tennis, the official statements from the governing bodies, the public scrutiny Sinner had to face, and the broader implications, we'll be hoping that the lessons learned from this single case puts an end to any lingering questions about fairness or how clean the sport is.
Shout out to Johan Kriek and Dominic King for sharing their thoughts and actually making this video possible in the first place. And guys, if you love this video and if you love what we're doing here at Courtside Tennis, be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you on the flip.